Hello, my name is Paul Marchbanks, and this is Digging in the Dirt. Today I'll be talking about the film Gran Torino, released in 2008. Clint Eastwood both directs and stars in what I am classifying as another example of a redemptively grotesque story, in which fictional trauma prompts self-reflection and points, directly or indirectly, to the divine. I'm going to guess that my own complicated journey towards the healthy expression of strong emotions is not unique. Though I cried easily enough in my early elementary school days, I was shamed out of such open expression in 6th and 7th grade by schoolmates who mocked me for being a wimp. As a result, I didn't allow myself to cry for about 6 years, not until I started dating Tracy. I'm not suggesting that she made me cry by toying with my feelings or treating me cruelly, though we've definitely provoked all kinds of emotions in one another over the last 30 plus years. I'm merely observing that close connection can reopen the stopped up valves of the heart when we take advantage of the opportunity that intimacy provides. How open should we be about how we feel? Are there certain emotions we should never express for social, psychological, or moral reasons? Is it important to find some kind of outlet for distressing emotions like sadness and anger so that the fear or desire motivating those emotions doesn't spin out of control? What about hate? It tends to demand expression. Should we give it free rein, or does hatred constitute an important exception to any guidelines we adopt about emotional transparency? In Matthew 5 of the Christian Bible, Jesus declares that allowing anger to manifest as hostile insults carries spiritual consequences similar to committing murder. He encourages his followers to turn the other cheek when attacked, and to actively love their enemies and pray for those who persecute them. This suggests that allowing anger to calcify into hatred is unequivocally wrong. Paul of Tarsus tackles the same subject, quote, "Having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members one of another. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and give no opportunity to the devil." Paul implies that anger can serve a necessary, healthy function when it's tied to truth-telling, but that when anger remains unexpressed, it can harden into hatred. Of course, letting anger loose without tempering it with love runs the risk of violent escalation, something most world religions actively discourage. Though British modernist D.H. Lawrence openly criticized religious strictures on sexual expression in his autobiographical novel Sons and Lovers, for instance, he implicitly supported Jesus's and Paul's teachings on anger and violence. His character, Mr. Morel, becomes the weaker, defeated partner in his rocky marriage after throwing a cabinet drawer at his wife and drawing blood. Soon thereafter, the narrator tells us that Mr. Morel, quote, "dreaded his wife. Having hurt her, he hated her." In this particular passage, Lawrence uses the word hate in the traditional sense to describe the enduring dislike of someone who has become an adversary. Elsewhere, he employs hate in more surprising ways, bending and stretching language in efforts to more effectively depict his character's temporary, heightened emotions. In Lawrence's 1915 novel, The Rainbow, Tom Brangwyn finds it difficult to express passion, loneliness, and frustration while his wife Lydia is pregnant with their first child. Feeling deposed from the throne of her affections, his unease breaks out in anger, and she responds in kind, quote, "turning on him like a tiger, and there was battle. He had to learn to contain himself again, and he hated it. He hated her, that she was not there for him." For a moment, it sounds as though their relationship might crack in two. Despite this open conflict, however, or perhaps because of it, the couple learns to move forward in unity. In fact, one could argue that their marriage is much healthier than those of their kids and grandkids, whose relationships Lawrence details later in the novel, because Lydia and Tom manage to express their emotions more openly than do their descendants. In this and many other similar situations, Lawrence uses the word hate not to describe a conflict that will permanently fracture a relationship, but to better capture the intensity of a temporary feeling. Tom does not withdraw permanently or completely from Lydia because he has, quote, an instinct of gratitude and knowledge that she would receive him back again. Deep down, Tom knows that they love one another, and so he tries to practice patience, however imperfectly. Eventually, his endurance is rewarded with a renewal of passion. Many readers these days remember D.H. Lawrence for breaking those rules of propriety that had in the Victorian period hinted at, without actually describing, sex. He surprises conservative readers with not only what he chooses to describe, but the words he uses in the process. In The Rainbow, Lawrence likens desire and sexual satisfaction to religious ecstasy, appropriating and redeploying Christian ideas in order to intensify his descriptions of intimacy. When Tom and Lydia Brangwyn renew their physical relationship following the birth of their first child, their joining is, quote, the entry into another circle of existence. It was the baptism to another life. It was the complete confirmation. They opened to one another like facing doorways, quote, whilst the light flooded out from behind onto each of their faces. It was the transfiguration, the glorification, the admission. Those who consider sexual pleasure to be a blessing bestowed by a loving God may consider Lawrence's word choices to be a bit blasphemous. They will also likely be irritated by all the cursing in Clint Eastwood's Gran Torino, another tale that explores the contours of anger and hatred. Jesus, Christ, damn, God, and various pairings of these words appear as often as racist slurs in the mouth of Walt Kowalski, a former soldier who served during the Korean War. Walt has reached his late 70s without learning to either control his tongue or to properly express his emotions. The film opens at the funeral service for his beloved wife, and though he thanks those who attend with the appropriate civilities, he expresses no sorrow either then or later, only irritation at the Catholic priest with whom his wife met regularly during her final months. His wife apparently asked Father Javanich to hear Walt's confession following her death, but Walt refuses the cleric's offers, calls him an overeducated virgin, and continues to avoid those church services which he says he only attended to please his wife. He receives no visitors, seeks no counseling, and resists friendship with his new Hmong neighbors. The only human contact he regularly, grudgingly accepts involves occasional phone calls or visits from his 2 adult sons and their families, relatives eager for him to die so that they can sell his house and inherit his vintage stuff. Most of these interactions and those early antagonistic encounters with his new neighbors are laced with the kind of offensive language that tends to keep people at a distance. His foul mouth also disguises the complexity of his feelings, covering over past trauma and current grief, as well as nostalgia, loneliness, and remorse, with a mumbled Christ all Friday, or something similar, as often as not punctuated by spit. Have you ever noticed that the figures of speech we fling out so casually, often unthinkingly, actually add weight to the ideas to which they're attached? It's pretty obvious when you think about all the ableist metaphors floating around public discourse. When I call an irritating driver an idiot, ask someone who missed my question if they're deaf, criticize those who don't share my political views as blind, and dismiss someone's unhelpful suggestions as lame, I'm reinforcing the idea that these physical differences are fundamentally horrible things, that they should define negatively the person on whose body they appear. Similarly, the act of swearing tends, in subtle ways, to provide a running commentary on the very ideas we're treating so casually. Please excuse my language in the next moment, as I'm going to say a few things to make a point. Damn reinforces the idea of a truly hopeless state separate from our Creator. Shit reminds us that whatever beauty we present to the world with our forward-facing side, we keep on generating stinky refuse out our other end. And the word fuck, which I only ever use for instructional purposes because I actually detest the word, takes a vulnerable act that I believe should solidify connection and turns it into a casual, dirty, and even violent thing. The percussion of the concluding k sound is much less pleasant than an alternative like making love. What do you think? Does the web of curses spun by Walt whenever he says Christ and God in frustration reinforce his loud rejection of religious service and ritual? Does he wholeheartedly reject the idea that confession of one's failings has no value? Does he continue to believe, as he appears to in the film's opening, that emotional transparency is a weakness, poverty an avoidable illness, humility in men a sign of effeminacy, heartfelt gratitude a waste of resources, and racial diversity a blot on the fabric of the USA? And what of sacrifice? Does he believe that this is something only to be practiced on the front lines of a war authorized by the government?